At the heart of the South African Reserve Bank Black Tower is the Netherdutch Reformed Church. Here is where it all starts. The South African Reserve Bank, or SARB, has 830 shareholders, with a small group owning 10,000 shares each. Its role is to protect the value of the rand and ensures stable prices of goods. It may do this by lowering or raising interest rates. The central bank further regulates commercial banks and prints banknotes. But is there more to this? Is your money more spiritual than it seems? Why is there even a church on the ground floor of the Reserve Bank? This is worshipping money, the dark secrets of the South African Reserve Bank. The Netherdutch Reformed Church sits alongside the South African Reserve Bank and forms the part of the South African Reserve Bank precinct. Is there more to this, or should we only accept that it is a museum? Or maybe money is more spiritual than we thought? Built in 1904, the corner du Toit and Church Street, now known as Hellen Joseph Street Netherdutch Church, has very strong connections to the Netherlands, having been designed and built and also finished by Dutch immigrants. The east wing of the church is named after the famous painter Vincent van Gogh's younger brother, C V van Gogh, known as Cornelis. Now, Cornelis, the lesser-known Van Gogh, came to South Africa to work as a draughtsman on the gold mines and later the railways. Now, Cornelis served alongside the Boers in the Anglo-Boer War. He was taken prisoner while on commando in 1900, where he became ill and died. The South African Reserve Bank first opened its doors for business on the 30th of June 1921. Prior to the South African Reserve Bank's establishment, commercial banks issued banknotes to the public which had to be backed by gold. There has been little to no transformation at the bank over the last 104 years. The South African Reserve Bank was only the fourth central bank established outside the United Kingdom and Europe, the others being the Federal Reserve, Bank of Japan, and the Bank of Java. William Henry Clegg, a distant relative of Johnny, was the first governor of the South African Reserve Bank from 17 December 1920 until 31st December 1931, almost 11 years. With 39 floors, the Reserve Bank Tower stands as the tallest building in the Pretoria skyline, situated at what was formerly Church Street in Pretoria, now Hellen Joseph Street, a street rich in South Africa's history. The street was named after the founder of Pretoria, Martinus Pretorius, determined that the famous Church Square be used as a marketplace and a churchyard in 1856. One of the first structures built at Church Square was two-door chambers by the Johann Rupert of that time, Mr. George Jesse Hayes, who owned and invested in most of the infrastructure around Pretoria. He resided at what is now called the Melrose Museum next to Beggars Park, where the peace deal between the Boers and English was signed in 1902. He was also a friend of the then leader of the Union, Mr. Paul Kruger, and businessman Sammy Marks. The South African Reserve Bank, the oldest central bank in Africa, issued its first banknote to the public on the 19th of April 1922. South Africa abandoned the gold standard in 1932. This is even before the 70s by Nixon of America, choosing to link the value of the local currency to the pound sterling as the new monetary policy framework. South Africa introduced the rand on the 14th of February 1961. It was Valentine's Day. Maybe is that why money disappears a lot on that day. 3 months before the country left the Commonwealth, the South African Reserve Bank Act of 1989 regulates the activities of the central bank. The government does not hold any shares in the South African Reserve Bank, and the biggest lie is that the shareholders do not have any influence over the selection of the governor or deputies or on monetary policies. Now, the South African Reserve Bank is not owned by the government. It is a privately owned central bank with a significant number of shareholders. While the government appoints the governor and the deputy governor as well as some board members, the majority of the shares are held by private individuals and institutional investors. Prominent South African companies which hold 10,000 shares in the South African Reserve Bank include Absa, Discovery, First Rand, Standard Bank, and Anglo American. Basically, these 5 institutions are the owners of your money. Some prominent companies which own less than 10,000 shares include Bidvest Bank, Agri South Africa, and the South African Pension Fund. Tito Mboweni, who was one of the major shareholders of the South African Reserve Bank, was commissioner in the 2000 when South Africa became the 13th country to adopt an inflation targeting monetary policy framework, targeting a consumer inflation band of between 3% and 6%. The South African banking sector has failed to transform over the past 100 years, and it fails to meet the needs of the people. The only attempt to transform the South African financial sector and the Reserve Bank was the Financial Sector Regulation Act that was only passed in 2018 during the Zuma years. Like, it took 100 years to review the laws that govern citizens' money and livelihoods. A lot has happened over the 100 years. Mandela went to Robben Island and became president, and even died before any sort of review on the financial sector of South Africa. Even Donald Trump went from celebrity to president, and we just celebrated the centenary of the South African Reserve Bank in 2021, talking about lack of transformation. The Financial Sector Regulation Act established the Prudential Authority, which expands the South African Reserve Bank's regulatory responsibility beyond licensed deposit-taking institutions and includes insurance companies. Like, why include insurance sector, which has transformed at a faster rate in the last 100 years, to a reserve bank that has an anti-transformational stance and seems to squash and crush every small player while protecting the big commercial banks? The South African government's lack of will and anti-transformational stance is the main cause of this lack of transformation. Not just that alone, but the banking mafia makes sure that government implements the regulations and red tapes that isolate and crush any small players or competitors, and you wonder why VBS and Itala could not be saved. The excuse is fraud and corruption, but the big 4 commercial banks of South Africa were found to manipulate the rand for a number of years during the Zuma days, but their fate was not crushed. Instead, they paid a small fine and all was well. All was well. Hakuna Matata. To start a commercial bank in South Africa will require you to at least have assets worth more than 500 million rand because of the red tapes government puts in place to protect the interest of monopoly capitalists, while our antitrust laws remain weak, with the Consumer Protection Act more focused on individuals instead of white monopoly capital. There are also a few prominent names on the shareholders list, including Anton Rupert Trust and JP Landeman Trust. The South African Reserve Bank Act stipulates that shareholders are entitled to a 10-cent per share dividend on an annual basis paid from the accumulated reserves. Now, let's be realistic. An average Sibusiso or Tabang from Soweto or Tembisa cannot buy shares or even be given access to do so. To purchase shares in the South African Reserve Bank, you need to go through a process that differs from buying shares in any publicly listed company. The South African Reserve Bank is privately owned and its shares are traded through the OTC or over-the-counter market. You need one of the 4 commercial banks that you bank with to authorize your purchase. And will they authorize that? And if you are not a political elite with influence, just forget it. Above all, there must be a willing seller, and most of the time there is none. There are mainly 4 types of banks: commercial banks, mutual banks, cooperative bank, and the new so-called cooperative financial institution. And there is no transformational efforts or diversity in the ownership of most of these banks, except the inclusion of a few black political elites who are handed shares to protect the interest of the big commercial banks who are also the owners of the Reserve Bank. The Netherlands Church at the precinct of the Reserve Bank is a symbol of who really runs South Africa.